Okay. Hi, Gerald. How are you?
Well, I'm just peachy. Thank you for having me, Douglas.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it. You are an author. Are you a full-time author? Is that what you do?
Well, yes, I am. I spent a lot of time as a business and technical author back in the days when people actually needed how-to books for using computers. So I did that for a lot of years before I turned to writing novels. And then I was represented by a pretty good sized agency for nonfiction. And then when I told them I was turning to fiction, they just they turned and walked away. So I've had my own small press imprint for about 15 years.
Okay. Why would they drop you if you switch to fiction? Is fiction not as marketable as nonfiction?
That was their opinion, and they had done the Dummies books, Chicken Soup for the Soul books. I mean, they really represented mass market trade paperbacks, and they just didn't want to have any part of fiction. Uh, Interestingly, since then, they've gone into, they have a division that is a hybrid publishing division that, I mean, they claim to be selective, but they do publish all manner of books.
So, what do you think about the new technological revolution as it applied to authors and now people being able to self-publish? Do you think that this is good, or do you think that it has somehow uh, cheapened the product?
Well, for the authors that are behaving in a professional manner, just the way they would with a publisher, I think that it's actually better. Um, the gatekeepers, in effect, were forced to step aside. And I liken it to um, the music business, which actually technologically crossed these thresholds first because music had the narrowest bandwidth.
Right.
Um, Basically, a self-published author is a garage band. And, no one should expect a limousine to pull up to your garage door and invite you to play the Hollywood Bowl. It just doesn't happen. So these days, you really must launch yourself, if especially if you're fiction or memoir. And what the mainstream publishers aren't going to go away. The record album labels did not go away, but what happened was that the access got easier at the same time that breaking in got harder. The noise level went way up. And there are very few publishers these days that really have the patience or the money to take someone from 0 to 25,000 copies. But if you have sold 25,000 copies and have a platform and your books are spiking on Amazon, they'd be happy to take you from 25,000 copies to 100,000 or beyond. That's what they do. So, going back to the garage band analogy, I would point to the first time that I heard the Pink Martini Orchestra was at New Year's Eve at Disney Hall. And I was stunned to find out that not only do they go on world tours, and you can, I mean, if you go to YouTube, here they are in Europe, there they are in some other part of the planet. They've never ever had an agent or a music label. They publish all their own music themselves, and these guys are the top at jazz bands. So I would say that's the direction it's going. I think also Amazon, for example, has always had an inclination to want to write their own rules, and they don't particularly like the idea of pre-orders, even though they have to do it because the traditional publishers demand it and the editorial reviewers demand it. But Amazon actually regards books as products, and they want to throw them out on the marketplace, and they want their customers to review them. That's really what they want. They don't really want anybody else telling their customers what they like or what they don't like. And in fact, an ebook is returnable. Not only paperback, ebook is returnable on Amazon. If you return an ebook, it will simply disappear from your device. So you can't say that there's that objection.
Well, that's very interesting. I was on a panel show a couple of weeks ago, and the topic was merit versus marketing. And I think this is kind of relevant to what we're talking about, where you said that they won't, the major record labels are the same. They won't take an unknown from a little club in Greenwich Village like they used to in the 1960s and sign them to a record deal. You've got to have a pretty strong following on social media. You've got to have a couple of music videos out that have 100,000 plus organic views on YouTube before they even look at you. You said it's similar with authors these days. Is it almost more important, do you think, for marketing versus the quality of your content? In other words, if you're mediocre as a writer but have stellar PR, can you get just as far as if you have the best book ever written but have limited PR?
I think that can be true. I think it will depend on the genre and the fan base. I think that, I don't write in romance and I don't write in fantasy, but I know that at least I've heard authors speak and talk about the fact that they're ginning out 10 to 20 books a year. I have trouble believing that those would rank as literary fiction in any way. But I mean, I'm no judge. Most of my stuff reads like literary fiction, even though I've done mystery and I've won some awards there. But I will say that also the marketplace is changing very rapidly, and I seriously doubt that traditional publishers are going to keep pace. I was an early adopter of Pronoun, for example, which was was going to be a competitor of Smashwords. And then along came Macmillan and bought them, and I thought, wow, this is great because we're going to have the fusion of hybrid publishing and mainstream publishing, and they're going to take some of their children and just really make them adults. Well, Macmillan deep sixth that company; they just abandoned them, and now Amazon has got this product called Kindle Vella, which is basically a short attention span, releasing a series of small Kindle books. But what they've done, interestingly, is that they are bolting your blog onto the bottom of every chapter. In other words, they're going to have user input fields, comment threads on every book release. So you may be getting, as an author, you may be getting opinions from your fan base as to where they want the next chapter to go. There was that experimenting in the movie business very early on, where they would have test groups who would pick alternate endings that they had shot to movies, right. And that kind of sank like a rock. So, but it's interesting that Amazon with that product is trying not only to cater to shorter attention spans and maybe kids reading snippets on their phone while they're waiting for the subway, but also that this degree of interaction that would not be part of a traditional publishing model. So the idea of shaking it up and, multimedia, virtual reality, I think all this stuff it's going to be very different a few years from now than it is today, as it is different today from what it has been. But I will say, and this is my strong opinion, and when going back to your question about genre and content, I work also as a developmental editor. I shepherd people through their manuscripts, and one of my preaching points is when you're writing your manuscript, when you're going through at least your first draft, please consider it to be self-expression. Please consider it to be art. Do not think of it as a product. Do not think of it as a demographic. Do not think of it as genre. Do not fret about whether it's middle grade or young adult or even whether it's fantasy or horror. Just dig deep into yourself, because right now there are 8 million Kindle books out there, and if you concentrate on your book as a product, you're going to have the 8 millionth and first that looks just like a lot of, hundreds of thousands of others. What the marketplace would like to see, and this is also commercial, what readers would like to see is what is deep in your soul that maybe nobody else is courageous enough or daring enough or insightful enough to explore. Then let your editor, let your publicist, let your beta readers tell you what it's like as a product, and then you can fine tune from there in your marketing plans. And yes, you do have to have marketing marketing costs.
I think that's very good advice. I absolutely think that people need to separate the artistic side from the business side. I think traditionally that's why all great artists and all artists in general had managers who could take that product, the art that was created, and turn it into a product and sell it without the artist having to go through that himself. That way they could just keep on track creatively. And I think that's getting a little lost these days because
that is getting lost.
Yeah.
That is a difference today, and it's become something of a stereotype. But the traditional publisher of today is not going to find the Maxwell Perkins editor that is going to turn a newbie into a Thomas Wolfe. It's just they don't do that anymore.
Right.
And in a way they're like Amazon in that they're letting the marketplace decide. And there may be a lot of voices that get obscured by the noise. That's entirely true.
Yeah, that is true. We've got about 2 minutes left. I want to hit on your book. Your book is right there over your left shoulder, called Kenyan Sundowner. Can you give us a synopsis of your book?
Well, yeah. I was sitting here in Los Angeles, dumb and happy, and my wife had been doing wildlife conservation and child welfare work, and she'd also been writing reviews on safari lodges and camps for Splash magazines, and we'd been back and forth to Africa as tourists quite a few times. And one day she just walked in and said, "Why don't we move to Kenya?" And it was like, well, I stare at a screen all day. If they have internet there, I can probably do okay. And, that was, COVID, Kenya. I mean, it hasn't really affected me all that much. But the culture shift in going from being a tourist to a resident, and then beginning to think more like a Kenyan. We came back after 2 years, and we said, okay, because it got interesting there. Well, when we came back, it got even more interesting here, not only from the standpoint of politics, but also from the standpoint of the global pandemic. And I do believe that one of the things that this book really follows a middle class, middle-aged white widower who he feels like he's running out the clock on his life. He doesn't really have too much purpose, and he gets talked into going to Africa on vacation, and he decides to stay. And he's basically pretty much the tourist observer. And sooner or later, he finds out he really has to act. And it was interesting. I've had some beta readers in Kenya, including an editorial writer for the Standard newspaper in Nairobi, and he said, we're coming up on national elections. This may actually inspire some Kenyans. And I thought, wow, I didn't expect that. So it's a novel, but names change to protect the guilty.
Well, interesting. I had a similar experience in my life in 2006. I went to Thailand for a vacation and ended up living there for 3 years, teaching English.
I had understood that. And you were talking about the isolation that the language difference caused. But see, in Kenya, English is the national language, although sometimes it's spoken with such an accent you can't understand it. And in fact, there's 43 different ethnic societies that used to be called tribes in Kenya. And actually, in terms of running into racism, and ethnic divisions, the Kenyans are much more caught up in their their feuds among each other than with anybody from the outside. And that was one of the things that surprised me was with what I understood about colonialism and the history, and then also some of the prejudices that we have here in this country. We may assume that they are the same. They're not.
No,
They're not. I
no.
was treated like distinguished. I felt like, okay, this is what Bill Gates must feel like when he goes anywhere. They just figured, okay, I was here to do business and I was here to spend money and wouldn't you like to be my brother? And I mean, the Kenyans were very generous, and I was a thrill to. I would go back, except it's still quite interesting there. They had alternative elections and swearing-ins a year before we had any of that nonsense, and the guy who ran the computer systems to count the votes was found dead. So, not we wonder what's going to happen in their next elections are August of 2022. So we'll see.
We do have to wrap this up. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Do you have a website that you want to give out? Personal website or website for the book?
Sure, GeraldEverettJones.com. I've got blogs there and think pieces. I've also got complimentary review copies of my Preacher Finds a Corpse, which is an award-winning mystery that was the beginning of a series. So yeah. I think I'm the only one. I mean, if you type my name in quotes into Google, I think all the results are me. But,
well, good. That always helps.
Sure.
Well, Gerald, thanks so much for coming on the show. It was nice meeting you. Nice talking to you. And best of luck.